Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Forward Space. Thank you for joining us for Earth Day, first of all, and for today's event, mainstreaming biodiversity, making biodiversity a campus priority. There are multiple events happening today, but the first one, panel discussion on how individuals, institutions, and governments can take action to protect and enhance biodiversity. And just to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Space. We are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, examine research questions and projects happening across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting. So we welcome any comments and questions there via the chat. And those of you here in the space, if you have comments, questions, just raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone over so everyone can hear. Okay. Give us a bit more context and introduce things for this morning. My pleasure to hand things over to, Sustainability Manager of the Office of Sustainability, which I already knew this, Cassandra Lamontagne. Cassandra, it's great to have you in. Good morning.
Thank you so much. Yes, so as Doug said, I'm the manager in the Office of Sustainability, where it is our mission to transform Concordia into an institution defined by ecological vitality, social equity, and economic integrity by driving tangible change and fostering a thriving campus environment of sustainability leaders. Happy Earth Day and welcome to the event today. We're really excited for you to be here for what promises to be a really special event. I'd like to thank too our biodiversity experts, including our panelists, as well as the other experts and our tablers who we have here today. And of course, thanks to the Fourth Space for partnering on this event. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many different First Nations, and today is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. In the Office of Sustainability, we recognize that Indigenous peoples have been stewards of the lands and waters of so-called Canada since time immemorial, and that Indigenous nations are the frontline communities most adversely affected by climate change, biodiversity loss, and other sustainability crises. Many of the most important sustainability progress taking place today is due to the leadership and knowledges of these communities, and we commit to act in ways that are in solidarity with their rights and sovereignty. I'd like to announce too that today's event has achieved Gold Sustainable Event Certification due to the efforts to reduce the environmental footprint and enhance the social impact of today's event. That includes sustainable catering from Nulufar, which will be arriving a bit later, reusable dishes, and a code of conduct to ensure that today's event is successful and accessible to everybody. The Sustainable Event Certification Program is run through our office. We encourage people to go to concordia.ca/events to find out more about the Sustainable Event Guide and potentially to certify your own event in future. So, biodiversity at Concordia. Biodiversity at Concordia has been advanced for many years through grassroots efforts, including through partnership with dedicated faculty and student groups. More recently, biodiversity has been subject to an organized, persistent effort, which has been integrated in campus operations and planning. I'm pleased to announce that in order for us to cement our commitment to biodiversity, Concordia has signed the Nature Positive Pledge. This is a public commitment that requires universities to collect biodiversity baseline data, set specific time-limited and measurable targets, create action plans to achieve these targets, and report transparently and publicly every year on our progress. Today, we celebrate the action that we've already taken towards these goals, and we invite all of you to participate in the co-creation of our first biodiversity strategy at Concordia, which will also inform our next sustainability action plan. On that note, I would like to introduce you to Jackie Martin, Urban Agriculture and Biodiversity Coordinator in the Office of Sustainability. None of our achievements to date in recent years would be possible without her. Jackie will tell you about some of the impressive biodiversity efforts we've undertaken in recent years, and she'll also take you through some of the activities that you can look forward to participating in today.
Thank you, Cass. Great. Yeah, thank you, Cassandra, for that introduction. As Cassandra said, today's event is going to kickstart our first big consultation on biodiversity initiatives at Concordia, working towards our first strategy. I do want to tell you a little bit of what we have been doing maybe in the sidelines up until then. So my job, and working with many other people here, is been mainly focused on monitoring biodiversity on campus and changing our grounds management practices to support ecology better. So one of the big things that we've been doing is we're employing a lot of citizen science activities. And citizen science basically means that anybody can participate in biodiversity science. We'll hear a lot more about this all throughout the day, but it's asking everyday people, anybody, to write down what they see, share what they see, and help us to get a picture of what's going on. So we've joined the Campus Biodiversity Network. We've been running pollinator surveys. We've started a bird watching group, a little informal bird watching group at Loyola, much thanks to Professor Emeritus Robert Titler for that. And we've also hired external consultants to help us with this. So we, as part of the campus master plan, we hired Nadeau Forestry to do a complete inventory of all of the trees that we have on campus. And this gives us an assessment of the number, the species, and their condition, their health condition. So we can kind of start to plan for our trees. We also hired EcoPivot to give us an inventory of the non-tree vegetation, the mammals, the birds, and the arthropods, which is clearly a huge undertaking. But when we take all of those things together, it does give us a pretty decent baseline of what we have on campus. Obviously, we're not going to catch every single flying insect or every single plant, but it gives us a starting point. And that's important as we start to move forward with our biodiversity strategy, because we want to know where we started. We want to know if what we do has impact. We want to see if there's changes in our environment outside of our campus that we should be acting to address. For ecological grounds management, two big things that we've done is last year we piloted reduced mowing areas. So we picked a couple of sections on the Loyola campus and we stopped cutting the grass and just kind of let it go a little wild. As you can imagine, this made people a little nervous at first because you don't know what's going to happen when you invite wilderness onto campus. Happy to say nothing bad happened. We got some puffball mushrooms. We got a few new species. And we had some cool little environments that people could get a little bit more shade, feel a little bit more humidity in there. And so we hope to continue and expand that into the future. And those efforts actually helped us to become one of the first 10 universities in Canada to be certified by the WWF as a living campus. So yeah, that was a big achievement on our part. And also we've been working with our researchers to study what we have as well. So we've put up some equipment. We've erected what's called a MODIS tower. So this is a wildlife tracking tower that it will receive the tags of birds, bats, butterflies, mostly birds that go by. And it connects Concordia, connects our campus to an international network where these species are monitored. We've also been working on bioacoustics monitoring with Mackenzie Guest, who's here today. You can meet her later, as well as with the Finding Urban Nature group. And so these folks have set up speakers, for lack of a better word, on campus, which are giving us information about what birds do we have and what bats do we have, all again leading into our baseline information. And many of you know, I hope, that we planted over 1,700 new trees and shrubs on the campus last year. And this was a project that we did in collaboration with Sauverdi, as well as part of the City of Montreal's Climate Action Plan for 2030, where we're trying to increase the canopy island-wide to 30% by 2030. So what we did on campus is we did mostly mini forests. So we've got a few new mini forests on the campus. And what we're hoping to do this year is then expand those into more educational places. We want to have interpretive signage. We want to have spots where people can like hang out and relax. And a feature of what we're going to do with that is we've created a tree walking tour podcast. You'll get to hear the first episode of it today. And then what'll happen is when you're at Loyola, when you're in these areas, there'll be QR code. You can scan that QR code and it will like guide you on a little walk through our mini forests. So I really hope that you guys check it out. And I'm going to move on to the rest of the events we have today because there are quite a few. We're starting with our panel discussion here. And yeah, I'd like to we'll dive into it. So the title of the event today is Mainstreaming Biodiversity. And this is a phrase that really stood out to me. It came out of the creation of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And the way I see it, it's a call to action on two fronts. One is biodiversity and its services must be considered in policies, practices, and all decision-making. And the other is that we as humans need to reconceive our relationship to nature. We need to valorize the complexity and interconnectedness that makes up the global ecosystems. And we need to pay the respect that's due to all non-human species, as well as our abiotic features. This might sound simple or might sound really foreign and really complicated. To me, I think it depends on the day, how complicated it sounds. But yeah, to help us make sense of this, we have our three guests here. And I'm going to start off by asking you to introduce yourselves and tell us what you think mainstreaming biodiversity is. Go for it, Emma. Yeah.
So hi, my name is Emma Despland. I'm a professor in the biology department at Concordia here. My research mostly focuses on plant-insect interactions, so studying herbivorous insects, which are the majority of the biodiversity on Earth. If you look at number of species, herbivorous insects are way up there. Looking at what plants they eat, how they make their choices, and what the impacts of these choices have on ecosystems.
What is mainstreaming biodiversity? Okay, yeah, everybody.
Okay, so mainstreaming biodiversity. I think maybe, okay, I'm going to echo a bit of what Jackie said. The first point is that this was in the text of the Kunming Montreal agreement. So that's the agreement that was signed at COP15. I don't know if people remember COP15. I was there as an observer. And one thing that comes out is that you've got close to 200 countries who have to agree on every single word. So you end up with a text that's very clunky because people argue about whether it should be important or very important or essential. So if this word mainstreaming biodiversity is in there, it wasn't just kind of dumped as an afterthought, it was thought about. Another thing I'm going to mention, I think that was in there that really struck me that was also thought about is that it mentions that the goal is to become in harmony with nature by 2050.
That's soon.
In harmony with nature, it doesn't really feel like where we are now as human civilization in general. So what that means in terms of how we need to get there is obviously a very big question. But perhaps a very philosophical one. To me, mainstreaming biodiversity, I think, is a bit more concrete. And the way I like to interpret it is to think of biodiversity like we think about an elementary school, a business, a university, an NGO, any kind of organization who's doing stuff with people. You have to make sure that the safety of those people is cared for. And even if you're not a safety organization, what you do is, build houses, you need to make sure that the safety of all your people is cared for. And if you don't know how to do that, you hire a safety expert. And I think what mainstreaming biodiversity means is in the same way. No matter what your organization is, no matter what you do, you have to think about its impact on biodiversity and making sure you have a good impact. And if you don't know how to do that, you hire someone who does.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. My name is Mohammed Al-Duais, and I am part-time professor at Concordia University currently, and also I am a co-founder of the co-op Cultivaction, which is work in agroecology in the campus and in a farm in the West Island. Regarding, I have a previous, of course, experience in conservation biology, and I did national projects with the BirdLife International, with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and also I work as a consultant with the GIZ. So I think mainstreaming biodiversity to all the actions that we take as individuals, families, community, and institutions. So it should be it should be add value to all our strategies and decision making when it comes to take action related to nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Carly Ziter, Associate Professor in the Biology Department, so right down the hall from Emma over on Loyola campus. And my research focuses on urban ecology, so understanding how, within our cities, we can better plan and manage all of our green spaces to support biodiversity, but also to provide natural benefits to the people who live in those communities. In terms of mainstreaming, I love Emma's safety analogy. I think that's really spot on in terms of how we should be thinking about biodiversity as various types of entities. Something else I think a lot about with mainstreaming is policy. That if we are creating a policy, whether that's an institutional policy, a municipal policy, a federal policy, we have to look at that policy through a biodiversity lens, whether or not that is its main intent. What impacts does that policy have on biodiversity, and how can we, if those are negative impacts, how can we mitigate them? Or if they're positive impacts, how can we enhance them? So making sure that biodiversity is, someone who knows something about biodiversity has a seat at the table when all of those decisions are being made.
Great. Thank you. So we're gonna, as we talked about, we're gonna kind of try to lay the groundwork a little bit for everybody, because one of the big things, like when I think about my job, like I got this job at Concordia, and it's like help improve biodiversity, right? Big place to start. I went knocking on their doors almost instantly for support. And now I've been in this for like 3 years, and what I see is that it feels to me like the climate change crisis in the 1990s. It's starting to be a thing that you hear on the news. In the 1990s, we called it global warming. A lot of people thought it was good. Who live in northern climates, but we're not there anymore. Like, it's advanced. The public understanding has advanced. And so that's why I just let's set the stage a little bit here. So when we're talking about biodiversity loss and biodiversity crisis, just what is that? Like, what is it that people need to know? Thanks, Emma.
So I think in Canada, if we're going to be local, one of the challenges is, I think as everybody knows, most of the population live close to the American border. That's also where most of the best farmland is. And that's also where most of the species live. Warmer climates tend to harbor more biodiversity. And so most of these if you think of natural habitat for southern Quebec or for the St. Lawrence Valley, there's very, very little of it left. And that means that species that depend on those natural habitats are at risk because there's very little of it left. So I think that's one of the challenges, particular for Canada and for Quebec, and is that protecting the southern spaces, because that's where most of the human impact is. And of course, within southern Quebec, Montreal is a big part of it. The greater Montreal area is an even larger part of it. So much of the challenges that are being imposed on these ecosystems in southern Quebec are coming from Montreal and Montrealers. So how then can we have a city that's, vibrant and dynamic, but that minimizes that kind of footprint? I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with all of this. And I think I can add more specific things. I think what's going actually in North America in general, that we are losing the old growth. So the old species, the old trees is become less and less, and we are harvesting more and more. And this leads to declining of the habitat and declining of the species. There is a lot of species that they need old growth to propagate. If you have no old growth, there is no more those species. An example here in Montreal Island in Morgan Arboretum, there is initiative that the citizens is leading, putting boxes for the wood ducks. It's a kind of replacement actually for the old growth, and it needs to be done on small trees that not that all near to marshland, so that the BBs will jump right away to the water. It's not that much successful because it is occupied by squirrels, by other animals. So we need the tree itself, I mean, to reach the old growth to sustain other populations. Thank you.
Sure. So maybe I'll just add to that, that when we're thinking about the biodiversity crisis, it's not only biodiversity loss. Obviously, biodiversity loss is a large part of this. We are, on the whole, as a globe, we are losing species, but it's also biodiversity change. It's, invasive species moving into new areas and causing changes to communities, or the shifting of, who is there. And so we can't just go out and, count up the number of species and give ourselves a check mark for biodiversity. There's a lot more nuance to that in terms of how these natural communities are changing to things that are new and unfamiliar, that we need to learn about and understand how they work in the context of that ecosystem.
Great. And I think because you talked about a lot about ecosystems, right? And then I feel like a tool that's useful to me to understand that is food webs or trophic levels. And I wonder, I think Emma, you agreed to go first again.
Sure.
So if you don't mind, kind of just give us a primer on what is that? And
so I think people used to talk about food chains where, you have a plant at the bottom that gets its energy from the sun. And then you have the herbivore that eats the plant. And then you have the carnivore that eats the herbivore. And then maybe you have a top carnivore who eats the carnivore, who eats the herbivore, who eats the plant. We talk about webs rather than chains now, because a chain kind of suggests this linear structure that isn't necessarily true. And it also suggests a kind of top bottom, which is a little bit unfair. So we talk about webs because really there are thousands of different plants, and then you have thousands of herbivores. Some of those herbivores are generalists and they can eat anything. And they're the ones that tend to do well in cities because they can eat invasive plants. They can eat anything. Some of those herbivores are specialists, that they will only feed on, say, a particular family of plants or even a few species of plants. Those are the ones that are more vulnerable. You then have some organisms like, birds or some insects that can either act as predators or that can also, say, eat seeds. So they're both kind of herbivores and predators at the same time. They're kind of omnivores. And that's where we start getting this web structure rather than, one going all the way up. You have a whole bunch of these, and then you have lots of interactions that operate in different and complex ways. And then often your top is actually a parasite. So, what do we do with that? I think the connection here, well, maybe I should stop there. Yeah, I mean, I'll stop there. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the trophic web is much more comprehensive, and it composed of food webs actually, and food chains. So it's more complex, but I mean, for simplicity, we return back to the trophic pyramids. So when we realize the trophic pyramids as a live thing, when you see that there is a producer, there is consumers, there is secondary consumers, and there is tertiary consumers. So the top of the pyramid is actually the predators, which is very important, and it gives a kind of regulation of the whole trophic pyramids. And the focus actually is more in conservation biology, in protecting the top carnivores because of the capacity of healing the system. Most of the keystone species, they are of the top carnivores, like the lion in the savanna, the leopard in the mountainous areas. So all of this should be taken in consideration, and we should first of all define what is the keystone species that needs to do the intervention and to do the kind of fast action to preserve this species. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to pick up on your word intervention there, because I think that's when we're talking about mainstreaming biodiversity and biodiversity on campus. When I think about, food webs and trophic levels, I think about where can we intervene or what can we do? And often there are particular species that that human communities tend to value or to like or to want more of. birds, for example. Everybody loves birds. We love to hear bird song. We like to go bird watching. You don't get your birds without the insects and the seeds that those birds eat. And you don't get those without planting the right plants. And so understanding those connections among different elements of our ecosystem can help us understand, okay, what can we do, on campus or as individuals? I can't go out and like snap my fingers and have a bird come, but I can plant a native plant that might, gradually support it through that food web. So thinking about which points of intervention we have a lot of capacity for on campus. And to me, a lot of that, we plant things, we move things around, we change the plants to such a huge extent. So when we're doing that, can we think about how those are going to affect the insects and the birds and the other elements of that system so that our choices, feed into those food webs?
It might be worth specifying for some members of the audience that the word trophic basically means eating. So you can say birds and caterpillars have a trophic relationship because the birds eat the caterpillars. And so, a trophic web is the web of who eats who. That might not have been obvious for everyone. And I think another kind of basic science point that might be worth mentioning is the idea of energy flow. And so if you look at, say, your first level of your plants and then the herbivores, it takes more biomass, just more sheer number of grams or pounds or whatever of plants to support those herbivores. And then if you want to support carnivores, you need a certain amount of mass of herbivores to support those carnivores. Usually the relationship is about 10-1. So as you go up each level, you get 1/10 as much mass of organisms simply because the rest is lost as energy through respiration and so on. People have seen this implication in terms of eating, saying why you should eat at the bottom of the food web. Because that way you can support more people with less food overall. It's also true in terms of thinking of an ecosystem. If you want to support top carnivores, then you need enough food for them, which means you need enough food for the level lower, which needs enough food for the lower, which means at the bottom you need an awful lot of food. And that means that those top carnivores are often the ones that are the most at risk because you need just huge base to support them, which I think was your point.
Excellent. Yeah. No, this is, oh, I don't take that. I have my own. Okay. And I think, yeah, like that makes a good point about the interventions that people can do and why we intervene at that level. I'm going to move on a little bit because there's tons to say there, and we'll have a lot more out in the day. And kind of thinking about it like broader, right? Like when I asked the first question, we didn't talk about like, oh, this species is in decline. That's not what biodiversity loss means in individual species. It's like a whole ecosystem. And humans are self-motivated creatures. And we have a concept called ecosystem services, right? So you need a whole intact ecosystem to provide services to humans. Somebody want to give us a little science lesson on that, and again, like how does that then relate?
All right, I'll let Emma off the hook for having to be the first one to answer all the questions. So when we talk about ecosystem services, this is kind of terminology that's been developed for this idea that people receive benefits from nature. So sometimes you'll hear this called like nature's contributions to people or nature's benefits or natural capital. Like scientists like to fight a lot about exactly the words we should use for this, but at the kind of heart of it is that our lives, our health, our well-being, our happiness all depends on nature, on having kind of functioning ecosystems. And something that I think a lot about as someone who studies ecosystem services is that this is not like some magical flow where ecosystems just give us lots of things all the time. It's a co-production. It's a relationship. Like we as people are involved in, managing or changing or protecting these ecosystems that then in turn we receive benefits from. So it's reciprocal in a lot of ways. And some really concrete examples, if we're thinking of our campus or our city, having large trees and canopy cover reduces heat in the summer. That's a benefit that we get from having, a functioning urban forest, is reduced temperatures. That can be really important. That can be life-saving during, a heat wave. Having functioning ecosystems, having wetlands helps to reduce floods, reduce the impact of storms. So there's these really tangible kind of health and safety benefits we get from, managing and protecting our nature well. There are also a lot of less tangible kind of cultural and spiritual benefits. I think for many people, if you ask them, what's your favorite place in the city? It's often an outdoor space. It's a space that has certain species. It's a tree that they really love. It's somewhere they can listen to birds. And those benefits that people get from, going for a nature walk, from gardening, from sitting by the river, those are also a form of ecosystem service, a benefit that we get from having kind of healthy functioning nature in the city with us. And so it's really kind of a catch-all term for what are the ways that nature benefits us, which is very anthropocentric. A lot of people don't like this term because they say, oh, well, it's all about us. And like, yeah, that's kind of the point. That's why we developed this framework, is for, in an ideal world, we would all just intrinsically care about nature. But that's not the world that we live in. So the more that we can realize or recognize, the many other ways that nature benefits and supports us, it gives us more tools, more options for, communicating, basically, for communicating or expressing that to different audiences.
I can add maybe a point that we should perceive the ecosystem services as a very comprehensive to the level of the biosphere. So most of the productive ecosystems actually exist in the tropical and subtropical region. We are all human beings sharing this resource because it's transboundary, okay? You need to clean the air from CO2, then you need to care of the tropical forest in Africa. What we are sending Africa, actually. So we need to watch our politicians, what they are sending to Africa. They are sending weapons, they are sending science. How many of our top, let's say, 15 universities in Canada have extension campus or research stations in the tropical south? So this is very important thing. I mean, we should help, but if they have no research capacities, we should supply with this research capacity. We should exist there because this system is belonging to us as well. Thank you.
Thanks. And actually, if I can pick up on that, it's the ecosystem services that you described aren't distributed evenly across the globe or across the city. We know this. And so I thank you, Mohammed, for bringing that up, because that's something I want to talk about, is what are some tools or policies like in urban planning or anything that, or actions that we can take to try to rebalance this and make sure that like humans are benefiting equally from services? I know this is a surprise question. I didn't plan for it with you, but if you have ideas.
Well, I don't know if anyone follows the international COP meetings. So they're both the climate ones and the biodiversity ones. The question of funding comes back again and again and again. And the question of how it's the countries of the north, which are now the wealthy countries, and the ones that have done the most polluting and have had the most impact both on biodiversity loss and on climate destruction. Maybe they should be funding global initiatives more, because it's countries in the south which are the ones who have contributed the least, and yet the ones who are going to probably suffer the most consequences. And fair models for that funding always get argued about, and we never really get there. So that is a huge problem. I think, Carly, you've looked at questions of inequality more locally within cities. And
sure, I can talk about that. Yeah, so these same kind of global questions of or problems of inequality, occur at the level of our cities as well. If we look at, not only Montreal, but many cities across North America, we see the ecosystems we see are deeply tied to things like race, wealth, education, immigration, basically all of the kind of axes of privilege that we have in our society. We see that reflected in where we have, beautiful large trees, where we have more access to green spaces. And in general, so this concept, often people talk about it as green equity, this idea that, everyone should have access to nature and the benefits it provides, but in our current society, they don't. Think about if you were to look at a satellite map of the island of Montreal, you would see this, beautiful green square around the town of Mont-Royal and another really nice green area around Westmount and some very gray areas in the east and north of Montreal. And these are things that you asked us about kind of policies, I think, in the question. These are things that now cities are really trying to correct and to work on. It's just a really challenging process, especially, I'm going to talk a lot about trees because that's what I study, but trees take a really long time to grow up. So we can't come in and, immediately correct these kinds of inequities across our cities. But I think the starting point is documentation, actually going out and documenting, where is our biodiversity? Where is our canopy cover? How does that correlate with other things? And then once we have that data, putting in place kind of plans or policies to correct it. And so often places will, cities, if you look in Montreal's canopy plan or climate plan, or they specifically will target low income areas, low canopy areas for kind of priority interventions when we're doing new tree planting at the city level. So some of it is like spatial prioritization, where do you put resources first? I think you're probably thinking of some specific kind of rules or policies, or maybe you are, but there are guidelines, for example. So one is 330-300. So this idea that everyone should see 3 trees from their home, live in a neighborhood with 30% canopy cover, and live 300 meters from the nearest green space. This is kind of loosely based on evidence that around 30% canopy cover, you tend to start accruing more of these ecosystem services. 300 meters from a park is about a 5-minute walk. That comes from the World Health Organization. These aren't, one size fits all policies. And often there's a lot of tension or frustration around, well, that's not going to work everywhere, or why this number and not that number. But I think the general, the benefit that I see in having some of these is having a guideline that is kind of spatially explicit, a guideline that talks about, every person or every neighborhood rather than just a whole city or a whole country. Because when you start setting your guidelines at the level of a whole city, you say, okay, well, we want 30% canopy cover for the whole city, or we want to protect 30% of green space across the whole country, the 30 by 30 target, that leaves a lot of room for inequity. It leaves a lot of room to have very, very high levels of protection in some places and very, very low in others. And I think we do need to think a little bit more spatially about, who has access to this, and are we prioritizing the areas with lower access rather than just taking a kind of rich get richer approach to conservation.
I can add one thing, which is very important characteristic of the kind of urbanization in Canada. So municipalities have a lot of freedom in producing bylaws, but they need green citizens to support the green councillors, because there is a lot of gray councillors that they are in the meeting and they are against any plan for biodiversity or climate smart agriculture or permaculture or community gardening. So they are against all of that. They need to give the lands to developers, to have more tax, more income, more salaries, all of this, their target. So you have, it's not necessary now the green councillor is part of the Green Party of Canada. He's green by his nature, okay? So as a citizen, you need to approach him. You need to sit in their meetings, because it's open meeting, and support him when he have an idea. Reach him with an idea as expert and tell him, we can do with this land this and this and this, and this will support this species, will do this and this and this. And they are very good. They are listening. Maybe they are not educated like the people here in the university, but they are well receptive and they appreciate, and they will keep consulting you all the time. What we should do with this land? What do you think we should do with this? So this is how we can approach the municipalities and start to change the bylaws. Thank you.
Thank you for making that point. That is a really, really important point, that especially in cities, people have a lot of power. And if we look at many of the large green spaces that we have in Montreal, and green spaces that people, love and kind of take for granted, they're only there because citizens, mobilized and demanded their protection, often for years or decades, where they pushed and pushed and pushed until those spaces were protected. And so a lot of what we have now, we have because of citizens, collectively getting together and asking for change and fighting for change. So being part of those movements might feel very long and frustrating in the moment, but historically has actually led to a lot of success in Montreal.
Great. Emma? Okay. Yeah, thank you guys for that. And I guess another area, I knew I wanted to talk about cities quite a bit because we're here. And I find that you can kind of draw a parallel between the way nature is treated in a city and the way nature is treated in agricultural spaces. It might sound strange, but like to me, I'm like, they're just both very tightly controlled. I worked in urban agriculture for years, and I became happy working in that when I learned to work with the insects instead of against them, because it's not a fight you're ever going to win. But that is sort of the conventional agriculture approach, right? Is like, I need this land to give me what I ask it for, and I don't want anything else. But Mohammed, you work in agroecology and restorative agriculture, and I don't know if a lot of people know about it, and I'd like maybe just like let us know, what is it, what's going well, what's not
thank
going
you.
well.
Actually, agroecology is a kind of restoration ecology in which that you are doing agriculture in harmony with the environment around you. So what we are trying to do is increasing the niches inside the farm horizontally and vertically. So we have different layers at the farm. We have different plants that they have different functions. Mostly we focus on the native plants so that they are high in number. Of course, there is no chemical pesticides. It's multi-species agriculture rather than monoculture. It's far advanced even than permaculture, far advanced than climate-smart agriculture, which is coined by the FAO. So it's much more progressive toward have much more ecology components and much more ecosystem components in the agroforestry or in the agroecology. What we try also to make to have a kind of food forest that can run with a cyclic food web and trophic webs inside the farm. So we are increasing, we are in the beginning actually in the West Island. We rent a space which is a historic farm for Morgan family. We rent a part of this farm, and we have our approach on saving water, harvesting water, for example, different method of cultivation that is adapted with the climate change, actually, which is coming to Canada, which is not exist before. So the dryness in the summer and in the spring is more quite frequent now, and you need to change even how to deal with the soil and to have a healthy soil. So this is what we are doing. And every year we have addition to the farm. So this year we will have 2 species of birds, chicken and the quails will be added to the farm, so that we will produce our nitrogen fertilizer from the farm. We have sun dryer for herbs, so it saves a lot of energy. We have sun oven. We have a herb house, and we are every year progressing in having more structure that in harmony with the environment and the whole farm actually inside the forest. So with this expansion, because we are quasi-organization to Concordia, we are expanding to the West. We are bringing now students and even staff. I mean, we are approached by many researchers and staff that they can come and do kind of research in the farm, and this is a very promising niche actually, and maybe it's a gap that it is not addressed, I mean, by Concordia a long time ago. But here we are. I mean, we are opening the farm for research. We will have a PhD student that he will do part of his research in the farm. We will have a METAC scholar that he will do some of his work in the farm. A master student is already contacted us to do part of his experiment in the farm. So it's progressing all the time. And the most important thing is the educational component of the farm. So we have multi-courses which some of them in Loyola campus and the others in the West Island. And there is also other access to 5 urban gardens. 2 of them is well developed actually in the West Island. And we get the students and the participants involved in a long course, which start in May and end in November. So they have hands-on work in agroecology from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, and with the possibility of expansion of the season. Thank you.
So I guess, like, would you say, now that you're getting more and more people coming out to the farm and they're learning, and that's a bigger piece, but like, how much urban, or like not urban ecology, agroecology, restorative ecology do you see happening in Quebec? Like or like, how can it be scaled up?
I'm not aware of a big agroecology initiative in Quebec, but there is in Ottawa by Durham colleague, and my colleague visit there, Eric, and he reported that they have a lot of activities in this realm, and hopefully that this will increase much more. There is some initiatives, for example, experimental forest for UQAM University in the West, but I did not have any clue about the agroecology project, which
so it's not mainstream.
It's not mainstream.
It's very much not mainstream yet. Okay.
Yeah, if anybody of them people know, he should tell us.
I do know there are initiatives for organic agriculture, which is not quite the same thing, but it's a step in that direction. And there is IRDA, who are out near St. Bruno, who are a research institute for organic agriculture. Because again, there is this question of specialist generalists. So, you know, if you have a new pest insect, for example, that is an invasive species, or that used to be only in the United States and that's moving north with warmer climates, if you can use DDT, that's easy. That'll kill everything.
Right.
You know, you don't need to understand the details. However, if you want to use less harmful techniques, maybe some kind of biocontrol, maybe using a plant that's resistant, maybe doing some of what Jackie was saying, working with the insects, you need to have a lot of knowledge, and the devil's really in the details, and the details will be different for every single species. And so that's where, you know, a lot of research and understanding become important.
Great. I'm just looking at time. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to start to see if anybody has any questions. If we do, bring them on. If not, I've got about 25 more written down that we didn't get to. So, but I really want to hear from you guys. So please, if anybody has a question, I'd love to hear it.
Also, those of you joining us on Zoom, if you have any questions, you could pop those into the chat. We can read them out. Those of you here in the space, just raise your hand. I'll run a microphone over. I see some questions. Oh, here we go.
I would like to ask a question. I attended a course on land ethics. So when we talk about biodiversity, can we also talk about the rights of the entities? For example, the land, the bird. Could you throw some insights on that? Thank you.
So that was, you said your course was on land rights? Land ethics, sorry, just to make sure I got you.
Now, for example, we have land, we have plants, we have humans.
Yeah.
So we have also anthropocentric world where humans are at the center.
Yeah.
Then when we talk about the sustainable world, we talk about geocentric, right?
Right.
So, but for us to exist, all of us, animal kingdom, us, we are interconnected. As entities to exist, we are interconnected. So we talk about the rights of sustainable world for humans,
right,
for species, for animal world. And also I read about in Reader's Digest about the rights of sea, rights of ocean to exist. So because when we have discussion like this, can we also get into policy making in the future? In that connection, I would like you to throw some light on the rights of these entities, which create a better sustainable world. So I leave it to the question to you to throw some light.
Great, thank you.
I'm not an expert here, but I do know that Ecuador, I think, was the first country to recognize the rights of ecosystems to exist. So the right of nature to exist. And they did that drawing very much on their own indigenous heritage of the Pachamama, who's basically Mother Earth, and recognizing Pachamama's rights. New Zealand has also accorded certain rights to nature. And there too, they drew heavily on an indigenous Maori tradition of recognizing rights of, I think, like you said, natural elements, rivers, mountains, and so on to exist. There is one river in Quebec that, as you were speaking, I've been trying to remember the name and it hasn't come to me yet. I don't know, do you remember? But there is one river where there is discussion about recognizing this river's right to exist. And if somebody else wants to talk, maybe the name of it will come to me. So, I mean, the idea exists. It's not very much yet, enshrined in our own law. It's maybe difficult to understand what exactly that would mean. But yes, it's an important concept. As a related concept, there is also the right of people to a healthy environment, which is still human-centric, but it's a related concept, because if people have the right to live in a healthy environment, then that environment needs to exist.
Yeah, Carly, did you want to?
Sure. I don't remember the river.
Well, somebody can Google it. Maybe.
I can't get out a phone.
Okay,
The Magpie River.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so certainly there are global movements to grant rights to kind of natural entities, and I wish we had like an environmental lawyer on our panel who could speak more to the power of those kinds of things. I think when Emma was talking, it was reminding me of the importance of kind of reconciliation and indigenous cultures as well when we're thinking about these things. If you look at, globally, studies of biodiversity show in, many parts of the world that areas under indigenous protection, indigenous conservation, harbor higher levels of biodiversity than, Western protected areas do, and which to me makes a lot of sense, right? People that are have intimate knowledge of the land, have a strong relationship with the land, know how to steward that land. And I think there are a lot more steps we could be taking to recognize those relationships and to kind of give power to Indigenous nations to steward their lands. I mean, that is starting in Canada in terms of Indigenous protected and conserved areas, for example. There are a number of these, and there is, I think, more and more discussion and awareness of this, but I think we also have a long way to go. I think particularly in cities, we have a really long way to go. When we're thinking about urban areas and urban conservation, we often tend to think of Indigenous conservation as, something that happens like outside of cities and in other areas, which is obviously untrue. We are on Indigenous land here. We have many Indigenous peoples and nations here that we're not necessarily recognizing in that context. And so I do think looking to Indigenous nations for leadership in conservation is really important.
I want to add one thing. I think we are distancing ourselves now from human being the center, actually. And now in the forestry, in the sustainable forestry science, there is much more recognition of the parasites or the root disease in the forest as a healthy situation for the ecosystem, because it will produce a gap. In this gap, there is more grazing animals, more bird niches, different than the birds that they are inside the deep forest in this area, which is like a batch of died trees because of the root disease. So there is much more deep understanding and comprehension of the whole ecosystem in this era. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And we have Any more? Yeah, I see.
Question here.
Thank you so much. My name is Jochen Jäger. I would like to bring up Albert Schweitzer. I think we are in the Albert Schweitzer year this year, right? 150 years since his birth. And he talked about Ehrfurcht vor dem Leben, so respect of life. And I'm bringing that up because it seems to me that he found a way to not be either anthropocentric or biocentric and have that as a dichotomy, but to combine that. So he was the doctor who went to Lambarena in Africa to work there. So it's a super interesting story there. And I think he is a wonderful example of somebody from the Western culture. Yes, we should look at indigenous peoples, but we should also look at our own Western culture where lots of people have made very, very important contributions. And if only we would know these well, we would be very far ahead of what we have been doing. So I would like to ask you if you have any comments on Albert Schweitzer and how much he might be a leading figure for us today, considering it's the Albert Schweitzer year. And he was also very important to speak out against nuclear weapons being put in many places. And he was a very important leading figure there. He got the Peace Nobel Prize in the early 1950s. So I think we can learn a lot from him, even though he wasn't really an ecologist.
All right, thanks, Jochen. So I do not know anything about Albert Schweitzer, so I can't comment, specifically on him, just from what you're saying in the context of your question. I think often, like, the knowledge is there. Like we know, and we have known for quite a long time. We don't know everything, but we know a lot of what we need to do better in terms of conserving biodiversity, to do better in terms of protecting other species, in terms of respecting life. We're just not necessarily doing it. And I think this brings us all the way back around to this idea of mainstreaming, and that we can't keep thinking of biodiversity or conservation or nature as its like own little niche discipline that some people care about, but something that really needs to be integrated across all sectors of society. And so if you are working in a sector that you don't know about biodiversity, you need to find someone who does, to talk to and to work with. And so this idea of yes, there are a lot of people we can look to that have had really great ideas, and contemporary people that have great ideas for how to conserve and protect nature. But if we continue to think of that as like its own little silo in its own field, we're not going to make the progress we need to make. It has to be integrated into other elements of society. If we're thinking about housing and development, we have to think about biodiversity at the same time. If we're thinking about financial policy, we have to think about biodiversity at the same time. And so really taking that mainstreaming piece seriously and thinking about, okay, in this context, what does it mean to think about biodiversity? That's really, really important. It can't continue to just be a little niche thing. And maybe some of it, we're sitting in a university, maybe some of that starts with education. Maybe there needs to be some basic, climate and biodiversity education, regardless of the field that you're going into, so that, when you're off working in finance, you have at least that basic knowledge of what should I be thinking about? Who should I ask about these things?
I think. Go ahead.
I think, Jochen, one of your points there about looking within your own culture is very important, in that, we sometimes say, oh, well, in the past, they didn't know that fossil fuels were bad, or that they would, fish out all the salmon. And that's not true. I think there always have been people who known. The indigenous people have always known. Anyone who lived with that close contact to the land always knew. And I think in all cultures, there have always been people saying, no, look, this is bad. We need to respect nature. The voice on the other side, of course, has always been money and power. And I think it's important to recognize that this cuts across cultures, so that we're not saying, this culture is good and that culture is bad, because that tends to lead to, conflict in a way that's not good. So it's more looking for those, I guess, calm, rational voices, the ones that are going towards that living in harmony with nature that's supposed to be our ultimate goal. And sometimes it makes more sense for you to look within your own culture. Yes, we need to listen between cultures, but you don't have to say all of my heritage and my background is bad. there will be something valuable in pretty much every part of the world. And then I think that then also does tie back to what we were saying in the beginning about the inequalities and the global inequalities, and recognizing that money and power has been, biased in some parts of the world, and that we're among those privileged. And so when we talk about more equality, that means sharing. It's hard now because Canada does not feel like a very wealthy place right now. But we are, and that greater equity means greater sharing, and I guess listening to other people on a more equal footing.
I guess something that I wanted to say is I've also not heard of Albert Schweitzer, and just to thank you both for bringing up those points, because I'm like, you validated why you consult the community when you're doing something like this. Us or the people who are working behind the scenes, we're not going to think of all of these things. And that is kind of the whole point of today, right? It's because we're building this plan around biodiversity, on mainstreaming biodiversity, and it should be something that everybody gets to participate in. And we need to hear everybody's ideas, everybody's opinions. Everybody breathes. Everybody sees the plants. Everybody's got something at stake in this. And I really want to just welcome everybody to keep doing that and keep talking. We are also out of time, so I'm starting to wrap up right now. But that, like I said, that's the whole point of the day. So we've got, and the next part that's coming up is going to be the conversation on the campus master plan. But then after that, the whole rest of the afternoon is a lot more free flowing type of stuff. You will see there are people walking around with little butterflies or flowers stuck to them. They are wandering experts. And you can just walk up to them and ask them questions about biodiversity, about science, about whatever. Other folks also have their name tags, and hopefully you've given a prompt. So I really want to encourage you to speak to each other and share these things. We've got a few spots. We've got a wishing tree in the back where you can write down your thoughts if you can't be here for the whole day. We've got a graffiti board, which I really hope people fill in. And yeah, a whole day's worth of events. So I guess I'll thank you guys first. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. And yeah, thank you to everybody at the fourth space for making this feel so much easier than it probably looks. And we've got food at the back. So yeah, please stick around, and we're here for a little bit. So if you want to ask more questions, be happy to talk.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, everyone. Just a little note for those who are joining us on Zoom. Thank you for your questions. We're going to be closing up the live stream, but we'll leave the Zoom open because there'll be another event coming up around 12:30. So you should stick around.